This is the Sony A7S Mark III, and in all honesty, a lot of you don't necessarily need this camera. The A7 III or one of Sony's other cameras is going to work just fine. But with all that said, this is a monster of a camera, my favorite camera I've ever used. Let me tell you why. My name is Chris, I'm a content creator using these Sony cameras, so if you're into that, maybe try clicking the subscribe button down below. So first things first, the flip screen. We have a Sony full frame camera with a fully articulating flip screen. Now, you know that vloggers want this. I don't really vlog, but it has so many more uses than just that. You no longer have just the weird little angled flip screen, so that was good for certain low stuff or certain high things, but in general, it had its limitations. We now have a flip screen that is way more adjustable for many different angles. You can go down super low, super high. You can see it clearly. It's great for all that. It's great for if I'm going out and about, I'm shooting a video like this in the field. I don't want to have to bring a monitor with me. I can now flip the screen around. I can film myself. Talking head segment is no problem. I didn't think Sony would do it as well as they have with this. It hasn't got loose over time. It still works exactly as it did when it came out the box close to 3 months ago. I don't really see the ergonomics of the A7S III talked about too much, but some things here that really stand out for me after using this for a few months. The grip is a lot deeper and it feels really good in the hand. In this small rig cage, which I've done a whole video about, I'll pop up here for you, it just feels like the absolute dream setup. I don't have a lens on right now, but it still has a real solid weight to it. Some people don't like that. I like things to be heavy. I like to shoot handheld, and having a heavier rig handheld just means it's gonna be smoother, less little micro shakes, jitters. This is a real, almost perfect setup. It almost rivals the EOS R's grip, which is my favorite grip I've ever used. Really, really happy with the overall design of the A7S III. Couple other little design things I really like that Sony's done. The record button right on the top here is perfectly placed. It's obvious what it does. It has a round red circle on there, which means it's obviously for recording. It's right next to the shutter button. You can't not feel it with your finger. If you know where the shutter is, it's the biggest button. It's right behind that. It's easy to push. It's nice and tactile. It's got a good little click to it. Great work with that, Sony. Another little thing they did, which I love, is the doors on here. It's no longer any flappy flaps that rattle when you shake it around. They're literal doors that open and close. And the microphone port is up here, just above where the flip screen is, which means it does not interfere with that. Now, the HDMI port is a full HDMI, which means there's no longer the little tiny mini HDMI port, which you'd plug cables into and they would just snap off very frequently. You now have a full HDMI port in there, so it's a lot more of a secure connection. It's not gonna get as loose. And yes, it does get in the way if you have an HDMI cable plugged in there, but if you have an HDMI cable plugged in, it means you're probably outputting to a monitor, which means you don't really need to use the flip screen anyway. The screen res on this is 1.4 million dots. Now, previously I had the Sony A7 III, which was $950,000, something like that. And there's a big difference, and having a higher res screen is a big deal because it means you can quickly glance at things and see if they're in focus. So having a high res screen is a real big deal, and it works flawlessly, and I love it. The EVF is, I think, 9 million dots as well, and I did see someone say it's like looking through a window, and I gotta say it's not. It's like looking at a screen, but a real high-res screen, and it's definitely the best EVF that I've ever used, even coming from the A7 III's EVF, which I loved. This is even better. It's a step up. It just feels and looks really nice. It's a joy to use. We're gonna improve menu system on the A7S III, and having come from the older style of Sony menus, I was pretty proficient with those, but let me tell you, they're not great, and it took me a long time to get proficient using those menus. To get to that same level of proficiency with this was a lot less time. I'm close to being there already now, so that tells you all you really need to know. The menu system on this is substantially better. It's a huge upgrade. You'll be happy with it. I'm starting to not enjoy shooting with gimbals as much, and I've been finding myself shooting a lot more handheld recently. And with the active steady shot on this, I pretty much leave it on all the time. It just gives you a little tiny crop, but it just smooths out so much when you're shooting handheld, enough that it really looks like you're almost on a tripod. If you've been watching my channel the past few videos, I've been putting a lot more B-roll out, and that's because it's just so much easier for me to shoot now. I can shoot all this B-roll handheld, and it's completely usable. And so this has literally changed the way that I'm shooting my videos now. I'm shooting B-roll. It's made it better, easier, and faster. I urge you to go out and try it if you have this camera. Just turn it on and go out and shoot handheld for a day and see what you think. I think you'll find that shooting handheld versus going on and off a gimbal all the time is just so much more freeing. You don't have to worry about bringing all this extra gear, and it is completely usable. Give it a go. Now, I said earlier in the year, before this was even announced, before the rumors were all confirmed, that I did not need 4K 120. Now, let me tell you, at the time I thought I was right, but after having used it, I was very, very much wrong. 4K 120 is like using 1080p 120 frames per second for the very first time. Apart from now, everything is just crispy, clean, sharp, and I love it. Up until recently, any corporate work, any weddings, I shot it all in 1080, and I didn't really think too much about it. Now, having used 4K 120 on this, I've completely changed the way that I'm thinking, and as of next year, I'm gonna be grabbing another one of these for a B camera, or an FX6, haven't decided yet, and everything's gonna be in 4K. Having things crispy sharp, looking that good, looking that clean, having the ability to reframe, because I can crop in a little bit. Croppability, is that a word? Croppability? I just made it up. Croppability is flexibility. Remember the first time you watched 4K, you saw 4K video and you just were wowed by it? Imagine that, but now it's super slow motion. And that is exactly how I feel about 4K 120. Let's talk about the weather sealing on this camera. Now, I really did drop this camera almost literally into the deep end the first few times that I used it. The very first thing that I shot with this camera properly was actually a wedding, and it poured with rain. Here's a picture so you can see. I mean, it doesn't really do it justice. The camera got absolutely soaked. Not to mention the bride and groom had a champagne fizz, you know, like they do in Formula 1, and it got sprayed all over the camera. So it really did get tested to the max, and there's not an issue with it. I've had it out in the rain multiple more times. I've had it out in the snow. I dropped it in the snow. It's fine. Trust your camera. It's perfectly weather sealed, it works great. Let's talk about 10-bit color, which we now have on the A7S III, the first mirrorless body like this that Sony has put 10-bit color in. Now, if you don't know why it's a big deal, essentially it records a ton more colors than what we previously had with something like the A7 III, which was 8-bit color. 8-bit color is 16.7 million colors, that's how many colors it can record. 10-bit color, although it doesn't sound like a lot, 2 bits more, it actually records 1.07 billion colors, which is almost too much to just comprehend. So what I've done is I converted 16.7 million and 1.07 billion to something that we can comprehend a little bit easier, which is a method of time, days. So I've converted 16.7 million colors to the equivalent of 200 days. 1.07 billion using the same conversion works out to be 32.1 years. So you've got 200 days versus 32.1 years. Gives you an indication of how many more colors you can record with 10-bit. Now, what does that mean? It means essentially you can change colors to pretty much anything you want. You have complete flexibility. I am no colorist, but with little to no knowledge, you can go into Premiere Pro or Final Cut and change shades of colors to something that you want to use. I typically change greens. I don't like how greens look straight out of any camera. You can change it to something that you like easily. It's completely usable. 10-bit is a big deal. But all that does come at a cost. Size and ability to edit. Now, this does record in different codecs. The more compressed the codec, the harder it is, the more taxing it is for your computer to edit, unless you have one of the MacBook M1s, which we'll talk about in a bit. I've been shooting in SI, which is the least compressed of all the files, so the biggest, and on my 2019 iMac, it handles it just fine. For 4K video at least. If I want to go to 4K 60, it's a lot more taxing. It can still handle it, but it's a little bit choppy now and then. If I want to use 4K 120, you have to go XAVC-S. There is no SI option, so it's more compressed and it's near impossible to edit on pretty much any machine. You have to use proxies. It will take down even the most spec'd out MacBook, iMac Pro. Like, people have a real hard time editing with 4K 120 from the camera. So you have to use proxies. I actually just put out a video about proxies. If you're interested, I'll pop that one up there for you too. In general, if you want to use any codec other than SI and you have a little bit of an older machine, be prepared to make proxies for everything. So you get that really, really nice color, but you get video files that are intensive to edit, almost borderline impossible to edit unless you use proxies. And also on top of that, the size of these files. They are big. For an example, I've got this written down here. So a 10-bit 422 4K 24 frames a second file that is 1 minute and 43 seconds long is 3 gigabytes. 4K 60 in SI, a 3-second clip. This 3-second clip right here of me waving is 268 megabytes. That's 4K 60 in SI. So the files are big, which means you need a big memory card and not just a regular memory card. You need a fast memory card. And there aren't a lot out there that work for everything, but the general consensus is that these, which I have been using, is probably not going to focus. I'll put some B-roll over the top. This is a pro grade V90 SD card, and they're not cheap. A 128 gigabyte SD card will cost you 130 US. A 256 gigabyte one will cost you 240 US. But I've been using these, and 4K 60, 4K 120 handles it all flawlessly. They're also really quick to transfer to your computer because they have a fantastic read and write speed. We're talking about 300 megabits a second for read, 250 for write. So these are fast cards, but you're paying a premium for that. Now with the file sizes as well, these cards fill up quick. So as an example here, to give you an indication, 128 gigabyte card, 4K 24 frames a second, 10-bit 422 SI will fill a card in 1 hour and 8 minutes. 4K 60 SI 10-bit 422 will fill a card in 27 minutes. And 4K 120 XAVC S will fill a card in 57 minutes. So you're not getting a lot of video out of 128 gigabyte card, so be warned. Fantastic camera, but you're gonna chew through money when it comes to buying media. Now you're probably thinking, well, I'll just shoot more compressed, which you can do, but if you shoot more compressed, it means you're making proxies of everything. If you're making proxies of everything, it means you now need space to hold that too. So if you work off an SSD like I do, you now need a bigger SSD. So you're buying storage one way or the other. It's something you should be aware of. As a stills camera, this is actually really enjoyable to use. The autofocus, the touch screen, even the shutter. The shutter has a, let me turn this on here. The shutter has a beautiful sound to it. It's very different to any Sony camera before. I really like it, and it just sounds nice when you're out using it. It's a great stills camera as well. Yes, it's only 12 megapixels, but unless you're blowing up on a massive billboard, for the most part, let's be honest, it's just going on Instagram, it's going on YouTube, it's going on the internet. 12 megapixels is more than enough. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Let's talk about overheating. Now, there's a certain brand of camera out there, which we all know had a bit of a debacle this year with overheating issues. I'm happy to say, haven't had any such issues with this camera. Even shooting 4K 120 for like an hour one day, just random B-roll of different things I needed for a specific video, no issues. It did get very, very warm. Everywhere warm to the touch, but not once did it give me the overheating warning, not once did it shut down. Now I do have it set to the higher level, but still, no issues. Now we do have a flip screen, and it's a touch screen, and the touch works in the menus as well. So the new menu system, you can touch to go through. And I gotta be honest, sometimes I forget that you can do that. I don't forget when I'm out shooting and I use touch to focus. I use that a ton, in fact. It's really useful, especially for shooting things like B-roll. Let's say I was shooting B-roll of this light over here. I would tap to focus on the screen, and I can literally just move my camera around wherever I want to get the movement I need. And I know it's tracking it and it's keeping it in focus. So touch to focus is incredible to use with this camera. And it does work with the menus if you want to use the touch screen, but I forget and I end up just using the joystick for the most part. But it's there and it works if you want to. Rolling shutter. Big issue on the A7 III, which I'm shooting on right now. With the A7S III, it's not an issue. There's next to none. Next. The autofocus on this is incredible. Now I never had a problem with the autofocus on the A7 III. All Sony cameras, in fact, have fantastic autofocus, but this is just a step above that. We now have eye autofocus in video all the time, which just stays locked onto an eye somehow. I don't know what kind of wizardry that is doing, but it's incredible, it works great. But one of my favorite features is the ability to adjust the autofocus speed. One thing I've always said, and kind of a reason why I think people think Canon's autofocus is a little bit better, is just the way that it actually focuses. It's a little bit slow, it's more natural. It racks focus like someone's actually pulling focus. And that's why I think people like Canon. Sony's autofocus is quicker, it always has been, but it just looks a little bit unnatural because it's so quick. It's almost jarring sometimes. But what Sony's done with this now is they've made it completely adjustable. So you can change the speed to however you like. If you want to have it super slow, so it's a real slow pull of focus, then you can. If you want to have it blazingly fast and quick, you can do that too, or you can go anything between. Here's an example I'm showing you on the screen right now of just how smooth it can go from one thing being in focus to the other being in focus. And the great thing about this is it works with touch to focus too, so you can be focused on one thing, tap on it, and it will slowly rack focus to the next thing based on your speed. So the autofocus speed being customizable is something I really love. I almost want to say it's my favorite feature on this so far. Another little tiny thing that they've done is the little straps, or where you put the straps on here. Typically with Sony cameras, you shake it and they rattle. Not the case with this. I talked about this before, but they've been made ever so slightly bigger so that now they move, but they don't move when you move the camera around. The buttons on this overall feel a little bit more refined. The AF on button's obviously a lot bigger. You now have your record button on there, which I've already talked about before. And the buttons just feel a little bit more spongy. They all feel like they stick out a little bit more. And I didn't think I liked that to begin with, but after using it for a while, I can say I do. It just feels like there's more button to push, and you feel like you're getting an actual response from it when you click it. So that's all the things I've got written down in terms of things I like, things I've noticed out of using this for the past 2.5, 3 months. But let's talk about some things that I'm maybe not so much a fan of. The biggest thing for me is not being able to shoot in APS-C mode when you're in 4K. So I would typically have a button assigned right up here, and I would just tap that before I'd record, and I can just punch in 1.5 times and just get more out of a lens if I'm using a prime lens. So I don't like that I can't do that now in 4K, and it's mostly because the sensor here is only a 12 megapixel sensor. So it's way better in low light, which I didn't talk about. Camera's great in low light. I haven't had a lot of opportunity to use it in low light, in all honesty, but it is a solid camera for using in low light. It's kind of odd because once you get into like the 6,000 to 8,000, it does start to fall apart real quick, which it doesn't on the A7 III. But then when you get above, I think it's 12,800, it gets instantly better. Basically, if you want to shoot on a high ISO, you want to go above 12,800, whereas you want to stick below like 6,000, 8,000-ish, based off what I've tried anyway. What were we talking about? No 4K crop. Yeah, so you can't 4K crop. You just learn to deal with it. You can't have everything, I guess. Battery life is not nearly as good as the A7 III. I talked about this in a video I put out when I first got this. It was one of the first things I noticed, in fact. I would say it's probably like 60 to 70% of what you get out of the A7 III. Now, it is exactly the same battery, but the reason is you're powering, well, I'm guessing it's because you're powering much more of a camera. You've got 10-bit color, 422, 4K 120, 4K 60. So I'm sure those things use more battery power, and that is likely why. I really hate the dial lock on here, having to push this down to be able to turn it. I haven't tried using it with gloves yet in the winter, but I know it's gonna be a pain in the ass to do so. So yeah, I don't like that. I wish they'd have gone with the exposure compensation style where you push it, you can turn it, and you push it again to lock it. I don't like that. The screen orientation on the flip screen here is kind of annoying. If you have it straight out like that, like facing yourself, and then you slightly angle it, it flips upside down, and there's no way to get around that. So I hope that they can fix that in a firmware update, even the ability just to turn off that it does that. I'm sure there's a way you can just assign a button to be able to just flip orientation of this quickly. That would be an easy way to fix it, but it is frustrating when you use it. And that is everything I've got written down. That's all my notes. The way I constructed this review is I used the camera, and every time I had an idea or a thought about something, I wrote it down, and that's what we talked about. That's how I think a review should be constructed, and hopefully that's how it came across. So that is my thoughts on the A7S III after using it for the past 2.5 to 3 months. If there's anything else you're interested in learning about, or something I didn't cover, maybe you have a question about, just pop a comment down below and I'll try my best to get to that. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.